Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming along to the latest in our series of Yes Linlithgow discussion evenings. Tonight I am absolutely delighted to welcome Derek Bateman. Derek is going to talk to us tonight, give us some views of his own and some of his own experience and what's led him to where he is in the current debate about Scotland's future. I think last night's and today's results from the European parliamentary elections should send shockwaves throughout the entirety of Europe, never mind Scotland, and I think will play an important part as we move forward with this whole debate. So I think what we're going to do in terms of format is simply, as I say, we'll hear a few words from Derek. The idea is to make this as interactive as possible. Derek, as I say, will give us some of his background, some of his thoughts and where we've got to, but at that point thereafter it's open to the floor, so I'm going to encourage everybody to ask as many questions as possible. But anybody who doesn't know, Derek's a journalist of 35 years or so. 45. 45 years. I was trying to say 45 years experience, and certainly for people of my age, was the voice of Radio Scotland as I grew up. So a very well respected man. And so without much further ado, Derek Bateman.
Thanks very much, and well done for being clever enough to applaud before you hear what I've got to say. I find a lot of people disagree with me on yes as well as no. It's a sort of puzzle to me as to why that happens. What I liked about this was when it was first advertised on Twitter, it described as an evening with Derek Bateman. And it was like one of those celebrity things you see in television, an evening with Peter Ustinov or someone, you know, well, not Peter Ustinov, obviously he's been dead for 20 years. I suppose he could maybe do a no campaign. one of the things I liked about it was, as soon as it appeared, it was retweeted and favourited by Tommy Sheridan. And I thought, in years to come, we might look back at this night and say, when the revolution started, it was in the Linlithgow Bowling Club. I should give you a disclaimer, first of all, in that I'm not a member of the SNP. I've never been in a political party because I don't like them. I'm not connected officially to Yes. I know the people in Yes, I even know some of the people designing from Yes. And I do accept, invitations from them to speak, etc. But I don't speak for them. That's the point I'm trying to make. Anything I say is my own personal opinion, and I do disagree on a fair section of stuff with the SNP, for example. And I think that's fine because to me it's a wider movement that we're talking about as opposed to the SNP. Although I am a Scottish nationalist, so just never got around to joining it. I'm also not an expert. If you're worried about your pension, don't base a decision on anything I say, for Christ's sake. I say I'm not an expert, but interestingly, over the last 2 years, I now know more about occupational pensions than any sane person should, unless they're making a living from it. I know more about warships and submarines than any admiral. And I had to bone up on all kinds of topics, that's welfare, etc. And although I'm kind of information heavy now, I think a lot of people have been doing a similar type of thing. And I think what it's done is opened up our mind to the way this country works, or doesn't work. You suddenly realise, that there is no national pension pot to pay for your state pension. It doesn't exist. The pension is paid from your taxes and national insurance as you earn it, and the government takes it, it goes into one account and it gets wheeled out the other to pay for the old age pension. There's no Norwegian-style fund paying for that. And the other one I discovered as well is that there's a lot of people who are were civil servants and are retired. And there's something like £2 trillion goes out every year to them, and I think it's something like 3.8 in the old age pension. So there's over £5 trillion going out, and they can only cover 25% of the civil servant's pension. They have a fund for that. The rest of it is just, this sort of idea of a Ponzi scheme, where you put your money in and it just goes round in a big circle. That's exactly what our pension system is. So I've had to learn some of that kind of stuff. But the point I would sort of make here is that I'm not an expert, and a lot of this stuff to me as a nationalist, actually, although it's important, I fully understand that, it's important to me too, the key thing for me is none of the above. I think a lot of that agenda has been driven, not unreasonably, but been driven by the no side because they want to cast doubt and to ask questions. And as I say, a lot of that's legitimate. For me, this is simple. This is about Scotland. It isn't about my pension or how many submarines, well actually we won't have any submarines, as I understand it. That's not what it's about. It's, do you believe in your country? Do you think your country should run its own affairs? There is no other country on earth where that is a reasonable question. And people, try to denigrate you for being a nationalist because they try to say Irish nationalism, brackets republicanism, or, Serbian nationalism and the Balkan War, etc. As a nationalist, I'm in a minority in Scotland, maybe even a minority in the Yes campaign. I'm not a minority in the rest of the world. 99.999% of the world's population is a nationalist, in the sense that if you say to an Australian, do you believe in Australia? He will look at you as if you're crazy. That's what normal people do. It is an automatic assumption. They never think twice about it. Only here in Scotland do we dance about in the head of a pin trying to describe ourselves patriotic, proud Scot, Scotland, Britain, all of that stuff. I mean, it's true, it's a mindset we've got, but I just want to, make the point that other people don't go through this. They just don't. And for me, this is just so simple. It doesn't matter what the no side say about statistics and information. For me, this is purely about Scotland. The question is, should the country be an independent country? If you vote no to that, in my view, you are preferring Britain as a political entity to be your state as opposed to Scotland. And to me, that is a vote against Scotland. We can, we can argue the ins and outs of that, but I can't see any other definition for that vote. And I certainly could never do such a thing. And just before I hand over to you, the other point to make that's been really striking to me is that I think this debate has turned into a movement, a cause, and I think it now transcends independence. I think the Yes campaign is bigger than independent. Now, in a way, as a nationalist, I shouldn't be saying that, but I think it's got a life of its own. And I think what's going to happen is, win or lose this referendum, Yes is not going away. People have got a realisation now about how the country is run, the mistakes that are made, how they're sidelined, how a wealthy country treats people and keeps them poor, and I think they're not satisfied. And I think it covers all areas of life, even things like that tend not to affect us in the central belt, like land reform. Who the hell owns Scotland? Well, I think half of it's owned by 400 people. Why is that? How did that happen? Why did we get farming subsidies? A lot of these issues have come to the fore, and it's really noticeable that from Shetland, from Yell in the very north to Yetton in the borders, Berwick across to Brodick, when you go to meetings, you discover there that, whenever there's a political meeting, there'll be some scruffy long-haired hunter like me making a speech. But what's become clear is that in the audience, there is what I think of as middle Scotland. There are people who live in stone-built houses, brick-built bungalows, car in the drive, maybe a pension, professional qualifications, respectable Scotland. Not the people who are normally engaged in kind of, hand-to-hand combat politics, as we're used to between the SNP and Labour. And I think that is a real sign that something is moving here. People are being called by this debate. Whether they're actually, or think of themselves as nationalists or not, something major is at stake. I think people have got hold of something here and are not going to let go. If there's a yes vote, it will not be up to the politicians to determine the future of our country. I think yes will see to that. If there's a no, and what happens thereafter, will also not be carved up, as the referendum was, by politicians. Anybody who's interested in the governance of Scotland would have insisted on a second question in this referendum to deal with Deagleman's. There's no, because we know all of the polling shows us throughout the devolution years, the biggest single constituency, if you think of us as thirds, knows devolutionists and independistas. The biggest group is the one in the middle, the Dido Max. But the Unionists contrived to make sure that question was not put because they wanted a binary choice so that they thought they could crush Alex Salmond and remove the SNP and things can go on as normal. And I'm saying that's not going to happen. Okay, I'll shut up now.
I'm sure the audience have loads and loads of questions. Anybody want to get us kicked?
Do you want to do Europe? Do you want to do the elections? Is that still pressing?
I think that's a major pressing issue. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on Europe then, Derek?
Well, I'm very Europhile actually. I'm a big critic of the European Union institutions. All of my journalistic life covering it and going there here to Brussels and Strasbourg. It's obvious that they're simply incapable of internal reform, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've got this reaction that we have now. A kind of more, people-led thing, just saying we're sick to death of it. I don't think it's to do with policy areas. I think, if we came out of the EU, I think we would immediately confront very serious difficulties. But I think the failure to recognise that it's cumbersome, unwieldy, people operating it are self-centred. They look after themselves ludicrously. They have their own tax rate. If you work for probably some of you do. If you work for Brussels, you have your own tax rate. And they're very, very comfortably off. And the trouble with that kind of setup is it becomes self-sustaining. And I think that the lack of reform, I want to see it democratised, but they just can't ever get round to doing that. And this may give them the kick. But I'll be surprised, because the truth is that after this, despite the surge in the small parties, I think they said that 70% of the members, the MEPs, will still be from the kind of mainstream groupings in all of the different countries. So the kind of insurgents, if you like, are going to be a smaller group, too small to have major influence. And I think the other thing that will happen is, because of the nature of their organisations, they will fall out. They will not be able to combine into a bloc to vote. I just think that's not what, you can see the way UKIP behave amongst themselves. How many resignations and fallouts, and how many people have been sacked in tiny parts of the Farage just have to get rid of people. And I think that will be replicated across Europe. As far as UKIP getting elected in Scotland is concerned, I didn't want that to happen, and I'm sorry it did, but perversely, and in a contradictory way, I think it helps. I think everybody's, there was that feeling that we will be able to look at England and say, ha ha, we're different. Well, okay. But in reality, it would have been like that's something happening over Hadrian's Wall. Now, the wolf is at the door. They're actually in our body politic now. And I think that should be a sharp and urgent warning to everybody who's opposed to the policies and attitudes, that the way to avoid this really is to get supercharged for a yes vote. And I think it will have that impact. I think once it dawns, the more exposure that people like UKIP get, the better it is for the Democrats and the Progressives, because you see how hollow the policies are and how poor the individuals are as well. So in a perverse way, I'm afraid I'm actually, quietly cheering that happened.
Can I widen it from Europe to globalisation? Because I think there are two sides of the same coin. The threat that comes to the people of Scotland, particularly a lot of the people who are believed to have voted for UKIP, i.e. the people with no qualifications, poor job prospects, etc., are the very people who are most threatened by the globalisation of international trade. And there are a lot of dangers on the horizon. I don't know if anybody else here knows about this treaty that has been discussed between America and Europe.
It's on the point of being agreed.
Yeah, precisely. But that carries with it the prospect that American firms could sue for not, say, for losing their profits because Scotland bans, introduces unit pricing of alcohol for health grounds. It raises the possibility of potentially having to open the health service to privatisation.
But the interesting thing about this is, I mean, you know about this, and obviously some people will, but where's been the debate about this? Where's been the European-wide debate with the people of Europe, while the bureaucrats were going to sign up a deal with America? I don't think that's taking place. I mean, also there's a responsibility here on the part of the media, who should be opening up these issues, and they haven't done it either. I mean, the difficulty is how you stop it, because, you know, you've got a commission who are pretty unaccountable, frankly, acting with American officials in the interests of big business. I mean, you know, there is the radical independence people who say that they're actually run by these big corporations. I've never quite bought that line myself, being too close to politicians, I suppose. But I think that's a very serious concern. I think within the European Union, I can't see how any individual country can, of itself, stop that. I mean, it may be that what we need is more of what's happening on the ground at the yes level, where, you know, the people of Europe maybe could turn yes into we, you know, in order to try and you know, prevent the worst excesses. But I mean, I think you have to remember too that on the minimum pricing, I mean, you know, Europe is desperate to stop this, because I mean, the big this is now a global issue already. It's way beyond Europe. I mean, the big world companies, the distillers, etc., you know, the drink purveyors are desperate to stop this measure, and Scotland is at the forefront of this. You know, we sometimes think of ourselves as a kind of small and insignificant place, but I mean, in global terms, on that issue, we certainly are not.
I'm going to ask chairs kind of relevant. Would Scotland having a voice at the EU table at least help highlight that?
Well, it certainly does that. Yes, it sure does. I'm not sure to what extent on the minimum pricing issue as well that there is widespread support for Scotland. I haven't heard much of that yet, you know, and I think that's partly because we are represented by you know, Britain is the member state, and therefore it's not one of our priorities. We've encountered this often in the past, and I think that may be one of the reasons why that voice isn't being, you know, the government, the British government, were interested in the business of minimum pricing, but they ditched that. And they backtracked on tobacco as well, did they not? I think they were, you know, very, very soft when it came to being approached by corporate interests. But that shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, you look who the donors are for the British government, for the Tory party. And a lot of crossover with the No campaign there as well. Hi.
How, at the moment in Europe, you've got 6 seats in Scotland, and Ireland, I think I've got 12.
I think we go to 13. I could be wrong about that.
I'm just going to ask,
yeah,
how many do you think
no, you do. Yeah, there's no question that your entitlement is much larger.
Ireland 6, and I think Malta have 6, and Malta's only got.
Well, it's the population of Edinburgh. I was saying to a friend from Japan there a minute ago as well that about he was asking whether we'd be, you know, still close to England if we were independent. I think myself that there would be quite a lot of areas of agreement on things affecting the British Isles after independence, and the combination of votes that London would have and that we would have in Scotland is greater than we have now as members of the UK. And then you have the potential, I mean, particularly we're maybe working with our friends in Ireland, to have a kind of mini block of votes at work in Europe, and there are things that we think, you know, suit our interest. And I mean, that could, you know, that could be to London's advantage at time as well. You know, we need to remember it's not one-way traffic.
It's not particularly about Europe, but it's my big bugbear. What can we do about the media?
What do you want to do?
What on earth can we do to stop them from lying? Because basically that's all of them are doing.
Well, I think they helped to get Farage elected.
Well, they certainly did that.
I think the BBC has played a major role, actually. I'm not saying it wouldn't happen, because there's obviously a political movement there. But the trouble here is, as soon as the journalists sense the story, they start to set an agenda. And it seemed to me that what happened was that it was almost impossible on the BBC network programmes, the ones that come from London, to avoid Nigel Farage. I mean, you switched on at any time and you heard UKIP, UKIP, UKIP. They turned the European elections into, they made it a UKIP event. They were inescapable. I mean, it's actually no surprise that they did extremely well in terms of votes, because what you were actually, in a way, you were voting for or against UKIP. That's what the broadcasters turned it into. I mean, I think that's a disgrace myself, and it's a lack of judgment. There's an awful lot of that going on. I think, to me, a lot of the media has been found out by this campaign, because it's, you know, there are certain things you take for granted. It's a bit like, you know, when the troops go to war, you know, whatever your misgivings about it, you know, like I do about, you know, things like Iraq and Afghanistan, but you kind of, you know, there's part of you says, no, we need to be careful here because they're now there and it's their lives, etc., and they represent them. So you have that kind of, that view, and it's almost a kind of, it's a default position. You're supporting what you regard as your country. And I think the media are still caught in that kind of mindset. They just can't grasp the idea of Scotland being independent. And as in, it's, David, did you see this quote from David Wilkie, the you know, fabulous, successful swimmer from the 70s? And but he's a genius, obviously. But he made some point. So I said, they cannot imagine. I don't get this idea of independence breaking up Britain. He could not grasp what that meant. A lot of people in the media have exactly that feeling, and it's a, you know, it's just a way of thinking, and they can't shake themselves out of it. I was at a meeting in Perth and was asked about the media in Scotland, and I said, you know, we'll not get the media we deserve until we are independent. They will finally wake up to the reality of what people are feeling and what they think when we are independent, when actually there's nowhere else for them to go. I think they have been genuinely caught out, and the stuff I've been writing about the attitude in BBC in Scotland, you know, is a kind of a key part of that, where the decision was taken over a year ago now that the referendum was business as usual at BBC Scotland. There was nothing would change, no plans as such would be laid. It was just another election, like we have the Euro elections, followed by the general election, etc. There was no extra staff. They eventually were given £500,000 by London, who realised how, you know, how annoyed the Scottish people were. So they had to shove money at the management of the BBC in order to hire people, and they misjudged the entire thing. They just, there was a disconnect, a complete dysfunction.
But they're still misjudging it.
Well, they are misjudging it because they got £500,000. They hired something like 15, they're trainees, basically, people who've never been in the business before. I mean, what they need is expertise and quality. Now, a lot of these will be, you know, bright young things who will become stars of the future, etc. But right now, they're nowhere near that level. And yet, you know, they're making programmes. I have to say, I've seen one programme series from BBC Scotland that made me think this is quality. It's made me, you know, it's on my agenda, and it's made me think. And that one was not made by what they call the referendum unit. It was made by a producer who won't be here, but who actually said, I don't want to be part of that. I'll do my own thing. So I'm afraid it is poor.
The National Union of Journalists, they had rumblings about that. Did they do anything?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I was in, we fought the management cuts. I mean, I was, you know, standing outside the building at 6 AM one Saturday morning on my own in the rain. I thought, where are the rest of you bastards? But we did. I was on strike. You know, I lost, I don't know, you know, in my house, because my wife worked there as well. She was also made redundant. We lost thousands of pounds at strike days, you know, between us. And it took them on, but you know, it's a hard task. I mean, the management are in Scotland, instead of standing up for Scotland, manage up to London, who tell them what to do, and then it's got to happen at ground level, and that's how it's done. Quite depressing, really. The journalists don't favour the management, but I honestly think a lot of them are now intimidated by management, because people just get, you know, pushed at sideline, given jobs they don't want, or made redundant. And once you create that atmosphere, you know, in an organisation, I mean, some of you probably know this, you know, it gets quite scary. And you think, well, I don't want to do anything to upset this person who's in charge in case it falls on me. But journalists can't afford to think that way. You know, if you look around the world, journalists, there's 2 currently being held. 2 Al Jazeera journalists have been held in Syria, I think it is, for weeks now. You know, journalists around the globe, there's about 50 killed every year. You know, they put their lives in danger, and yet in this country there's, well, I hope, no chance of that ever happening. You don't need the same degree of guts, but you do need guts, you know. Part of being a journalist, to rattle the bars of society, not sit there cravenly just accepting what you're told. So I'm afraid it's a failure for me.
What's the potential there for nominal one-day strike by members of the NUJ? A big part of being members of the NUJ is some form of protection. And that would be a gesture from the people saying, look, we're a little bit uncomfortable about reporting non-silence.
I'm a life member of the NUJ.
Yeah.
45 years continuous membership last year. The journalists, the NUJ, discovered over the CBI membership, you know, when they discovered that the BBC was in the organisation, and they demanded that they come out. And of course the BBC did a BBC fudge of saying, well, yes, but it's not the BBC, it's a member, it's the world, you know, the one that sells programmes to the rest of the world. So that's our commercial arm. So that's staying in, but that's nothing to do with bias in the news department. So we'll continue in membership, but we'll suspend it temporarily, and then we won't. And the journalists complained, but nothing actually happened from it. And to be honest, a day-long strike, I mean, we've learned this lesson in there. It's kind of soul-destroying, to be honest, because it doesn't achieve anything. They don't bend. They're not interested. So I don't think that's going to happen. What would happen, and what would change, and what might just happen, I think particularly, if, unfortunately, there's a narrow no, I think there could be a non-payment campaign in Scotland. I think the Yes campaign, if you think about how many people are in it, if you got 100,000 Scots to say, because they've decriminalised it, you know that, it used to be a criminal offence not to pay your licence fee. Cheeky bastard. Pay for my salary. But you know, it's been decriminalised, so you're not going to go to jail for it. And I just think, you know, that's got to be a possibility. If people feel badly enough at the end of this, if we don't get what we want. Well, that's true. I know some people are. I mean, that there's a declaration and a sign-up of people agreeing to do that. That will scare the BBC witless, and they will act if that happens.
Yeah.
Not a question. Come back.
Just on the same point, on the same vein, I mean, I don't know how you feel, but I personally feel that there will be, as far as the media is concerned, I feel there will be a tipping point. I think we're fast approaching that, and when you see, you know, how the Sunday Herald have come down, and I think there will come a point when it becomes obvious that Yes, because I honestly believe, genuinely believe that Yes are going to win. You know, I've got absolutely no doubt in that, and I think the way things are moving, there will be a tipping point when journalists and you know, media will realise, and some more than others will realise that they're back in the losing side. And I think then there will be a change of mindset, a change of attitude, and some of them will really fear for their futures. I mean, fear for their careers, because people will not be forgiven. If there's a no vote, there will be a lot of people who will not be, and rightly so, will not be forgiven for betraying their country, betraying their people. And this is something that people will be forced to think about. But I do believe it will come to a point when it becomes obvious. And I think now that we've got beyond the last time that we'll be voting along party lines, now is the time that everybody can come together in the Yes movement. All the Greens, Labour for independence, if we can harness them and get them to come up and stand up and be counted and say, well, you know, that's another point, because I don't know why they're not divorcing themselves from the Labour Party. But when this happens, and it suddenly will become obvious that Yes are on the march and Yes are going to win, I think the media will then have to rethink their position.
Well, what will happen, I think, I wrote about this because you're right in one way. If the opinion polls overtake, if Yes overtakes No ahead of the vote, and if it appears that it's going to be a win for yes, the newspapers will turn on no. I mean, they will start. I mean, they've been, if they feel they've been led along by people like Alistair Darling and the British government, and it's not worked. It's just journalists. It's like what do you call it? Like a bloodlust. It's like when there's blood in the water and there's sharks around. I mean, I know it's a kind of feeding frenzy starts, and then you think, what's a corpse? And then they start attacking. They'll want to know, why has Alistair Darling failed? There have been hints of that already. They will start turning on them to say the British government got its entire strategy wrong. Who's to blame? I mean, that's when newspapers do that big time. Who can we blame for whatever's happened? And there's no question that even the newspapers now who are firmly for no, will do that. I think they'll do it with real venom if it becomes pretty likely that there will be a yes vote. I don't think, though, that they will back a yes vote. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, that's the point I'm making really is, it would only be, in my opinion, after, at the time of, after a yes vote, if we're heading for independence, some of these newspapers will think we really do have to reappraise. It will take the cataclysm first before they will do that. But, you'd still be able to see them change their tune in what they're writing. But I can't envisage anybody other than the Sunday Herald coming out in favour of. I don't think the Herald will. You do wonder, though. You wonder if Scotsman is failing badly in terms of hard copy. It's increasing its sales online and it's doing a deal with Sky. I'm not quite sure what that amounts to. But when you're failing as bad as that, I mean, what was the share price? Was 17 pence or something for Johnson Best? You think, can you not waken up to the possibilities here? There's a new market here, and if you look at what's happening online, the number of people who are following this online and getting something from it is pretty phenomenal, actually. And they don't, they think that just by putting their own newspapers online to be read there, that's enough. And I just think they're missing a real trick. They want to get an element of what Yes is saying online into their newspapers. Nobody approaches me, for example. I mean, I'm toxic.
We've got a range of other questions. We've got a couple of guys doing it in front here. So, Kenny, first one, then.
Well, I was going to mention, the Farage situation. I think, I actually don't think the media have created Farage. I think the media have created the politicians that have created Farage. The problem is, as I see it, that there's 24/7 media coverage. These politicians are scared stiff to say anything very meaning. They're frightened of making gaffes, going off message in case they're hounded. And the result is we've got all these monochrome speak your weight machines that say absolutely nothing. I used to love watching Question Time when I was young. I can't watch them, I just fall asleep. It's so bland. I mean, there's nothing left. All they are doing, Labour, Tory, is just serving the corporate interests. And because of that, up comes Farage, speaks simple language, and personally I think he's a semi-fascist, but that's the same point. Simple language that people, especially as my friend over there referred to at the bottom of the scale, find appealing. Right? And that, the media can't handle, because it's something that is completely different from the stereotypical politician. That's who I blame. That's a different angle, and I don't know how
I think that's perfectly true, yeah. I mean, they have kind of massaged them to the point where they're kind of indistinguishable. I mean, I remember maybe about less than 10 years ago now, I mean, we all used to, as journalists, whether it's the BBC or newspapers, everybody covered the political conferences. There was the UK, the Labour, Tory, Lib Dem, and the same in Scotland, we were adding in the SNP, and we all knew those were big events for the media. And well, it's probably about the Blair and Alistair Campbell period where they began to kind of treat people as eccentrics if they weren't on message, or you briefed against them. That was the other things to do within their own side, And I think they began to kind of turn these things into that more American, the presidential sort of rallying idea. So they planned everything to the point where when we went to conference, you always looked for dissent. I mean, is everybody happy? Are they hell? So you dig out the people who were not happy. You couldn't trace them after a while. There was no point in going. We were simply doing party political broadcasts for the parties. So that, we withdrew from that. And that's been an ongoing process. And interestingly, I was reading the UKIP manifesto today. And some things what's wrong, some good ideas. But that's one of the things he says, an end to political correctness. Now, unfortunately, while that may be appealing, I'm afraid it does leave open all sorts of things that you don't realise have become unacceptable. I mean, it's been a change in my life. The way we used to talk when I was a young guy about black people, I look at it now and I just, get already, just think, dear God, did we honestly make those jokes, And even just things like going for a chinky. And I said, well, I don't mean that to be a racist. It's not, But then people say, hang on a minute. There are Chinese people in our community who don't like that, and therefore that's the kind of benchmark that is applied. So there's an appeal about, you want people to be honest and outspoken and controversial. That doesn't happen. I mean, for example, look at the backbenchers at Holyrood. Name a party. They're all the same. When do they ever speak? When do they stand up? Whoever makes a speech that is interesting and beyond the party's own position? Nobody does that.
It's not like Margaret went independent.
Well, yes.
Sure.
Yes, I mean, I think, I love Margot. I think the thing is that, I'll tell you a story about Margot actually. She and I disagreed about Alex Salmond and the gradualist approach. I mean, if you remember the language in the 80s, she and Jim were fundamentalists. They wanted, just go for it, and people will follow kind of idea. And the Salmond idea, which has been, I think, justified, is you never get too far ahead of the people, or you lose them. No point in marching ahead, playing the pipes, and there's nobody behind you, But so we always had this argument, me and Margot. And when I was working at the BBC, I went to see her in her house in the Grange in Edinburgh for an interview, a radio interview. She was sitting watching country western music. So we did the interview thing, and of course it was impossible to be with her without having a political discussion. So she started on me, and it got quite heated. And I'm thinking, well, I've got to watch my time, I've got a job to do, etc. Look, I'm going to have to go, Margot. And by this time I was standing up, and she walked past me down the hallway, locked the front door, and came back and started again at me. It was very, very difficult to escape. How did we get onto that? I think there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues involved with that, yeah. But I mean, it's not just, I think in Margaret's case, and Jim too, I think it's not just about being able to articulate their view and not being afraid to do that. Like, they have real belief in what they're saying, and I think they expect you to agree with them. And that's slightly different, if I may suggest. I mean, it's always be a bit watchful of people who move from one party to another and ask yourself why that might be. I mean, Jim's got lots of awareness. I mean, in 1990, when Gordon Wilson stood down, and it was Margaret, the late Margaret Ewing, was the favoured candidate of the leadership against, what's his name? Alex Salmond. And I spoke to Jim privately at the time as a journalist, and I said, but you are the outstanding performer. He said, I would split the party. As many hate me as would vote for me. So he had the understanding of what kind of character he is.
So a question we've got. Yeah.
So I just want to go back to the licence fee point. I'd thought of this and thought, well, do I have to give up my TV and all the rest of it? And so I had a look into it, went on, Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert guy's website. It was great to go on and save money, TV and phone bills and all the rest of it. So I went on there and he's got a page about what you actually have to pay the licence fee for, and it's a lot easier than I thought it would be. You don't have to give up your TV, you can still have your TV and you can watch anything on it. The only thing you can't do is you can't watch programmes broadcast as live, and you can't record them as live on your TV or whatever. Apart from that, you can watch anything. So you can watch BBC iPlayer, 4 on demand, HBO Player,
sure, but if it was a campaign though.
Exactly, but I think a lot of people, maybe if they realise that it's an awful lot easier to do than you think. And personally, I can, even those kind of, what there is there, I can live without my normal TV for long, football match and a crack. So but if people thought it was just in September, that could be different.
The The other thing about the BBC though is that the money that goes in also pays for things like the World Service. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we don't normally routinely consume here, which is very expensive. I mean, having a foreign correspondent based in a country is hundreds of thousands a year. And you get a depth and a quality, you know, from all of that. I mean, and it goes, I mean, to remember, in some of the audiences, you're talking tens or even 100 million people are listening to the BBC. But in 1990, I was part of a group of journalists who I was selected by the American government. The consul in Edinburgh invited a group of journalists to lunch. And we didn't know what for, and at the end of it, he was actually trying to, you know, pick out someone to send on one of these trips. And he selected me, and it's all paid for by the State Department. So it's all highly suspicious at one level. But the idea was you go to America for a month and they pay for you to go. And I was with a bunch of guys and women from the third world, mostly. It's interesting why that's Scotland in with these relatively developing nations. But they lived in countries where one of the guys, for example, was a political correspondent who had the Taliban would come to his office when they had something to say, and he had to print that because otherwise they would kill him and his family. So as a journalist, you know, that was his choice. So that was, you know, that was a kind of example. People in South America, places, Chile, who had journalists who had been tortured and disappeared. So you had this big group of people. And we went to the American equivalent of the BBC World Service is Voice of America. And we went to meet the guys there. And the people from the third world, there's about 20 of them, had no time for Voice of America. One of the reasons was that every hour or something they have like an editorial speech, you know, like the president will come on and say, this is why, you know, you've got to back America kind of idea, and they hated that. But they trusted the BBC, and it was astonishing and quite moving to hear stories of how they had, you know, when they were under severe pressure, wherever it was, the Balkans perhaps, how they could hear the BBC and trust that BBC. You know, some of them had been in hiding in different places, and the value of that service, you know, is immense. It used to be paid for by the Foreign Office. I mean, the Tories stopped that, and it's not all the cost has now been handed on to the BBC, which probably means that in future it will be cut back further than it is now. But that is something which has done what they call soft power. You know, that's done an amazing benefit for Britain through the BBC. Things that change people's perception, make them feel well disposed towards you. You know the stories about Mark Tully, the guy who was our man in India for years, and he would go to some, you know, the remotest village, you know, in this massive, massive country, and the kids come on here and says, Mark Tully, it's Mark Tully, it's the man from the BBC. I mean, you know, you can't really buy that.
Is that one of the reasons why there's such visceral hatred amongst certain sections of our campaign about the BBC's coverage and their significant no bias? Because they have been a beacon for so long around the world for impartiality. In fact, I was getting asked a question tonight about the BBC being impartial and having to say with a heavy heart, no, absolutely not. They're not impartial in the slightest. Because we've all grown up with exactly what you're describing.
I do agree with that. I mean, I think I need to be a bit careful here because I think there are differences, there are nuances in this argument. I mean, I get into trouble with the BBC, who won't have me in the building anymore, and with nationalists because I don't comply with their preconceived notion of it. The idea that there's a conspiracy I can't buy at all, because I mean, you know, I was inside for 25 years and I can't, you know, it's just inconceivable to me that, you know, somebody could, and I never was told to write something or say something along political lines of any kind. It just didn't happen that way. But it is interesting as someone who's now outside to observe it and see poor judgment, bad mistakes being made, lazy journalism. It's you know, you think all journalists were the same in a way, but if you don't have good leadership, if nobody sets a standard, if nobody says this is the bar before you get something on air, all of that's gone from the organisation that I work for, and it has gradually been eroded over the years. And the other thing that is really obvious is you cut the resources in broadcasting. there's a kind of, I forget what it is now, it's a kind of an equation about television, we call it production values, that you can actually visibly see the improvement in quality the more money you spend on television programming. And when you withdraw it, you see the difference. And when I started working on Newsnight in Scotland, I mean, there was a dedicated crew, 2 days to shoot a film. They were running at something like, up to 7 minutes each, which allowed you to develop your journalism. I mean, when I left, the cameraman was also the guy who edited the film. He was only available on the day of broadcast, which means you've got just a few hours to make a film. I mean, it's very time-consuming stuff to do. There used to be someone who was the kind of archivist who could hunt out all the film, background material for you. That was all stopped. You had to do all of that yourself as well. You just cut and cut and cut, and then what happens is morale collapses. Because there's a level reached in any organisation where you think, you know what, they don't care. They don't care about the content, they don't care about me, they show that in their attitude, therefore, give them the money, I don't care. And that's what's happened.
Should you not just be commercialised then?
Well, I think that would be a shame. I think we've got a fantastic model. Nobody else has got this, and if you make it work.
It is too politicised.
Well, I mean, it doesn't need to be political. Yeah, they're focused very much in Westminster. Yeah. I mean, an example of that, which I thought was just embarrassing, was when the Vote No Borders block started. I mean, they sent up Gavin Esler or someone from London on the basis of a news release which said we're a grassroots movement without any evidence to back it up. They did no basic research of who these people were, where the money was coming from, or what they were about. And they did a piece based on the press release. They interviewed the people who are part of it, who were set up as ordinary people when they were actually part of the camp. I mean, actually, it was a scandal, and it's utterly indefensible.
The CBI situation is the same.
Yes.
There was no evidence for the CBI consulted any members in Scotland.
No.
That they were going to sign up to be, officially an
But nobody knew the BBC was in the CBI. Nobody in the BBC knew they were in the CBI.
But nobody challenged them on it or checked it before they started putting those stories out. And it's still, that tobacco's still going on. It's still going on, and there's still lies, because I think I saw the other day that the CBI claimed it was a junior member of staff, and it wasn't. It was actually their senior campaign manager who signed the document. I'm beginning to get concerned about the Electoral Commission on these kind of things, because they've chosen just to annul that. When, and then a week later you get the evidence that it wasn't the junior member of staff that did it, it's quite concerning. But I just think, I agree with you. I think the BBC does fabulous work. Fabulous work. They do fabulous drama, they do fabulous, wildlife programmes and da-da-da. But particularly in Scotland, facing this referendum would be total rubbish.
But it's using current affairs.
Yeah.
That's where the issue is. I mean, they're still making great programmes about Scotland. I mean, they still can do that. But it's the sharp end of journalism where they fail. And their own opinion polling shows that. I mean, I think the last survey they did was that less than half, would that be 48% of people said that the news and current affairs did not reflect Scotland to them, didn't reflect their life in Scotland. I mean, they did a staff survey, they do these staff surveys, they pay a company to do it, and then they don't release the details. I mean, the staff have to say, can we see the staff survey then that you consulted us, and months later they release it. And something like, 25% of the staff in news said either okay,
I'm going to take a couple of questions. We'll talk to people later, a while later, so I'll take a couple together.
Very quickly, I'm very concerned about the mediocrity of the interviewers. I think they're absolutely shocking. There's not one comes to mind, including Brian Taylor, because I heard him this morning, and it was almost, you could almost hear him sneering when he was making comments. He was improving, but this is both STV and BBC. The standard is incredibly low. I've done interviews, not at that level, but they're basically mediocre, and it's a disgrace, and it's the way they interrupt, and there is a bias. they definitely interrupt those from the Yes camp. It's all, and this thing with the hand in front of them, it is just so rude. You know, people are trying to talk, and suddenly you see the interviewer's arm going in front of them. And you've got to be quite a tough baby to react to that. I think maybe the Yes people have got to get even more training. They've got to be trained by somebody like yourself, can I suggest, how to deal with that.
What was David Dimbleby last night?
Oh,
His attitude to Alex Sanchez. I mean, it was through something with television.
Yes, because Alex a threat to them mentally.
Yes.
Oh, I know
Yes,
that.
and they do it, and a lot of them are mediocre. And whether you love or hate our cabinet, the Scottish Parliament, if you look at the intellect within that group of guys, they're very bright people. And I think that's a lot to do with these interviews because they're undermined by them. They can't handle them.
Do you want to come? We'll get another couple of questions. Yes. Yeah. So the chap over there, and there's another chap here as well. So we take, and Barry as well. So we take these three, and then we'll pick up the point.
You've answered part of my concern, but when you kindly told us that there is no conspiracy at the BBC, because I began to wonder.
Well, they couldn't organise a conspiracy. They could not organise a conspiracy.
Can you shine some light for us? This disturbs me a lot on the thinking. What is the thinking behind bringing James Murphy up? And what is the thinking currently on Sarah Smith? You know, and basically destroying the programmes that we currently like, the News Night Scotland, which up to date is quite good, and headlines on a Sunday on the radio. You know,
Ken McDonald.
You know, it all seems to go downhill deliberately. I just wonder if you could shine a light on that.
Well, we're going to take these points as well.
Yeah, I wanted to bring you back to UKIP for a second because I was canvassing in the Cold House last week, and I was actually speaking to someone who was going to vote UKIP, and he said we've got far too many immigrants. Now you know the figures, and I know the figures, and it's an attitude that has been beamed in, to use Dimblby's phrase, from the south, that immigrants are a problem, whereas they're not in Scotland, and yet the perception is that they are. So I would be grateful for any advice as to how to counter this on the doorsteps.
It's a question from a boy, actually. Do you feel that the Better Together campaign in certain councils, such as West Lothian Council, are missing the biggest opportunity to bring a new political class in? In West Lothian, not one debate is allowed to be held within schools in case they put any bias in the children's minds. The children are fighting for it and asking and being told, no, you can't have it. Is this a massive missed opportunity and the biggest political decision that these kids are ever going to see in their life to bring them in? You're not allowed to have a debate in a West Lothian school in case one side's influenced. You're not allowed to bring speakers in either.
But it might have been West Lothian who said that you couldn't use a public hall.
Correct. Not allowed to use any public buildings, and you're not allowed to have debate. And he's furious. He's 12. He's engaged, and they will not allow any form of debate at all.
It's the biggest thing in their generation. We need to have it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was at in Skye at the weekend doing a meeting, and a woman said, or she had a teenage child, and was asking why more teenagers aren't engaged with it, and I was kind of, I went a bit off the list, you know. I said some good things about it, but I said I think there is an issue for a lot of teenagers who they're just not into politics, at that age, and frankly, what they see on television is men in suits, and you can understand their kids have got other things on their minds. But everybody kind of said, no, that's not true. So, I think I would have thought that the kind of current affairs interest in school would have, as you say, what an opportunity to kind of. One of the big problems we've got is, I think citizenship should be one of the kind of issues. You've got to work out and learn how your country is run and why we have the system that we have, rather than just falling into it. What a golden opportunity for kids to debate.
Hiya, I'll be a first-time voter, and I disagree that there's a lot of people that are actually interested, but it's the problems in the media that are why young people are confused, because they can't see what is actually going on. So in terms of the media, what changes will actually happen? Because it's good to talk about how things are and how things were, but what will actually change in an independent Scotland for the media and for young people.
Well, I think the fact they're giving you the vote is a major step forward, I think. If you're 16 and 17-year-old, I mean, that in its principle is just a huge change. And says, I think as well, when you say that there can be no tuition fees, for going to university, that's another massive declaration, which I think they're going to get into deep trouble with in Brussels if there is independence. But as a declaration of intent, I think that really does mark out the territory. I mean, I don't know how you engage young people. I mean, I sort of said jokingly at the meeting in Portree, maybe a phone app would help. But I don't think anybody's actually done that, because it seems to me if you're talking about information, that's one way of doing that. To keep it to the point and be presented in a way that teenagers would respond to.
One of our young people, some ideas on that?
17, first time voter. The only reason you're gonna, well, the only way you can engage young people is if you get the young people to do it. I started off in high school, and I could safely say about 80% of my school were no voters. But it was a sort of default decision for them. Like, they hadn't really looked into it. But you'll find that more people read about it. I mean, obviously you've got to encourage them to read about it. But the more they read about it, the more likely they are to vote yes. But that's happened at the school that I go to. So you've got to get the young people to do it. Get someone on side who's young and into politics and into researching the debate, and get them to tell their friends rather than,
You weren't at the meeting in Stirling that I did, were you? Me and Pat Kane did Stirling, no?
No, I wasn't.
Because a lad like you, in fact, he was younger than you, to be fair. He stood up and he said that at his school in Stirling, he said that he had gone in with a yes badge, and everybody laughed at him. He said, but I stuck it out. He said, I stuck it out. And he managed to convince one of his pals that maybe he would like a yes badge. He ended up getting about 6 or 7 people wearing yes badges, and he kind of turned the mood in the school where it suddenly became quite the thing to have a yes badge. And he kept going back to Jerry McLaughlin, the Stirling, the organiser, to say, I need more badges.
That's exactly what I did.
Well, that's interesting though, isn't it? It's like evangelical stuff.
Yeah, one of your friends on side, I mean, you got to the point
tambourine.
where you were walking into a classroom and there was always at least a couple of folk that were writing a yes pen, wearing a yes badge, and that normalisation resonates with quite a lot of the young folk.
Very good.